Hi, friends. Thank you for downloading today's podcast. Be sure to check us out on the web at www.thesceneshow.com, where you can find our blog and find the new exclusives and new offers to you, the listeners. Don't forget to check us out, and be sure to, if able to, consider donating to The Scene Show. And in order to help us out, in order to offer incentives to guests and buy new equipment and things of that nature, 100% of your proceeds will go back into the show. And thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy today's broadcast. And welcome to this edition of The Scene Show. Great to be with you here for our 25th edition. And we are making a big deal out of this, or I am making a big deal out of this, because it's 25 episodes of edifying, educating, and encouraging the body of Christ. And so I'm marking the milestone. Now, this was supposed to be a couple of weeks ago, but with Holy Week and things got busy with assignments again, and so... But I am just celebrating the fact that I made it to 25 episodes, and the bulk of that time has been spent looking at the development of the Christian church. And today we're looking at the world of the Reformation. And I chose to call it that because because we're looking at the Reformation's historical context. It's really a period that I feel like it needed some justification of the context of the period before going into the theology of the period. So we're going to talk about the Reformation's historical context, what made it what sort of lays the groundwork for the Reformation. We're going to talk about the printing press, we're going to talk about the economy, the changes in the economy, the social tensions, and then the crisis of values. And we will leave it there and then come back to that next week, to that point. So this is episode 25. Great to be with you here. Great to be with you here. We've got some exciting things coming up, but I won't divulge them quite yet because I'm not sure how it's going to work out with planning. We do have a guest coming on, hopefully soon. Hopefully that'll work out, and hopefully we can have that as well. So we're looking at the context of the Reformation. And I took a break from Olson this week in preparation and used Carter Lindbergh's The European Reformations. This was the textbook that I used when I when I took the class on the Reformations at Siena College under Father Dennis Tamburello. So shout out to him if he's listening. And so we're talking about the world of the Reformation, the historical context of it. Now, really, the thing to keep in mind, I would say, for the context of the Reformation is that, well, one, Lindbergh says that it's a world of, the Reformation is one of crisis, a world of crisis. And that crisis is really precipitated by the plague. Now, I think there's something like 20% of Europe gets wiped out by the plague. It's death is everywhere. And so the plague breaks down cultural and social norms as people are left to die. So remember, you have people dying left and right. So it kind of leads to this breakdown of society. You have people who survived the plague moving to cities, and this leads to economic changes. You have the new attitudes of humanism developing, which we talked about last time, and this also contributed to the change. You have natural disasters striking in quick succession, with one back of another. So really, if we think that the pandemic was bad, and I'm not saying that it was. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that it was anything that wasn't important. But if we look at it in comparison to the plague was far, far worse. And so this mass death and the changes in the economy led to the rise of the payment system for masses coming to the aid of the souls in purgatory. So what we have is the exploitation of the doctrines of purgatory and indulgences, and that's what Luther will get upset about. So you have death everywhere, and you have this sort of system of paying for the remission of sins that develops as a result of this constant death and suffering. You also have the 100 Years' War between France and Britain, and the high taxation from it resulted in peasant revolts. This, combined with the plague, will lead to the push for more equality. So there's a greater push here for things like equality, and again, the focus is on the individual. Things that maybe we can't fathom today. Things that we can't fathom. We can't fathom a world that's not focused on the individual. And in this case, the focus becomes more on the individual and away from this idea of what Lindbergh calls something like the Corpus Christianum, if I'm getting my Latin right, or that the ideals for society is this Christian city-state is essentially the ideal model for society. And so there's this focus on the individual, and the prestige of the church is falling with the sale of indulgences. And then there's also the invention of the printing press. And the printing press reduced the cost of producing books and made them less expensive. So, whereas before, books are made slowly by hand on sheets of papyrus or what have you, that's done away with when paper is invented. What we know as paper today is invented along with the printing press. And so these ideas the ideas of the Reformation will be able to become widespread, and they will blanket Europe, is the term used by Lindbergh. Whereas Wycliffe's ideas spread slowly through handwritten copies, Luther's ideas blanketed Europe. So Luther essentially becomes the biggest user of the printing press. And so this is where opinions begin circulating like crazy. Literacy goes up among the laity, and people actually start to read, and people begin reading. And much of the literature printed, understanding, is religious literature. So it's really a different world, and it's a different world than what we know of in the modern period, where there is no real separation of church and state yet. And again, these are ideas that will come out of the Reformation. So it will change the Western ethos. It will change the Western way of doing things. And so mining becomes a the mining of silver becomes a prosperous industry in Germany. And this is where the economy shifts from a barter system to a coinage system. And it directly affected Martin Luther because his father could afford to send him to school because of the wealth from mining. And his future protector, Frederick the Wise, also became wealthy through mining. Mining also led to the development of the cannon and the gun, and this meant that peasants had an equalizer when fighting against knights. So it goes through, and we see these changes go through, and they now why are they important? They're important because they go through and they equalize things and equalize the opportunity for fighting. And really the economic world has the changes in the economy has a direct impact on the church. Now, the social tensions, the rise of a money economy created the social tensions. Because while the money economy created new wealth, it also creates new poverty. So if we can imagine the new system flies in the face of the old medieval value system. These are my notes here from reading Olson, or from reading Lindbergh. If we can imagine here, the world is changing, the world is collapsing, and it's the main crisis that Lindbergh points to is a crisis of values, and we kind of touched on those last week or the last time when we talked about the pre-Reformation reformers. But you have the Western Schism going on, where the church is divided over the Avignon papacy, and it lessens the prestige of the church. So that basically the main crisis, where the main crisis comes in, is that the main source of security, which is the church, is tottering. It's on the brink of, it's incredibly corrupt. And again, we noted briefly the sale of indulgences and the paying for sacraments that Luther that will come to be essentially the hallmark of the Reformation, will come to be the thing that Luther rallies against. But we're going to be throughout. So this kind of goes through and gives you an idea of the world, of what the world was like on the brink of the Reformation. That the world is starting to fall apart. You see these changes, like the printing press, these changes in the economy, these social tensions. It is going to lead to the complete turnover, a complete unhinging of values, and it changes the Western ethos. It leaves one of the legacies of the Reformation is that it leaves what Lindbergh calls a democratic ethos in Western culture. So the very ideas that we know of today is of democracy and freedom and personal freedom, individual freedom. Those are all going to come out of the Reformation and from that period. So this is to give a little bit of context. And I assume that there are probably things that I've missed and things that I've just kind of glossed over. And so if you have questions, feel free to send them along to tucalis@hotmail.com. Feel free to send any inquiries, any questions on this period. We will next time cover more on this crisis of values, and we will get into the rise of Martin Luther. It was, again, I thought that if we break it down into digestible chunks here, that we can more easily digest it. We can more easily understand it without rushing over things, and things get missed out, things get misquoted. And so that's where I'm going to leave it today, is I'm going to stop before getting into things like the Avignon papacy and the corruption of the church. But just to give you a sense of, in the culture, we're seeing this breakdown. We're seeing this change of values. We're seeing the change from the emphasis on the city-state to the individual. We're seeing this emphasis on human freedom, this emphasis on the fact that books become less expensive, the fact that mining becomes popular in Germany, and the changes that are going on in society, in the social tensions. And basically that as these changes are going on, the church kind of gets sucked into the corrupt ways of the economic changes and the economic aspect of it. That this is a time, this is a time where the church really blends into society. And the reason why I bring that up is because we are, I've often heard this said by certain preachers that, I'm not sure who said it, but basically that the church runs on a pendulum of either standing out from the culture or blending into the culture. And when we looked at, say, the persecution of the early church and things like that, that's a time when it stood against the culture and stood out like it should stand out. But now we're seeing it blend into the culture and being absorbed into the corrupt practices of the day. And so this is important because this will help us to understand Martin Luther. This will help us to understand the world in which he is living, in the world in which the reformers live, and all the reformers, not just Luther, but you have the big three reformers that we're going to look at: Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Ulrich Zwingli. We're going to look at those three. Those are the major reformers, and we're going to look at their ideas and try and make sense of them, and make sense of this period in history. So the point I was trying to make was that the church goes back and forth on that pendulum of blending into society and being like, where Christians are like everybody else, and being against the grain where we are standing out for Christ. And ultimately, this is one period where we did not stand out, and we dropped the ball in a lot of ways. And it's not really, the corruption in the church is not unlike our present day, where there's distorted teaching, corruption across denominations and across the so it's not unlike the modern day American church, where the American church is kind of blending into the culture and not standing out like it should, or standing out like it has in other periods. But so we're going to talk about this. We're going to get into this in depth and in detail. And so this has been our 25th episode. Again, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Facebook. Check us out on our website, www.thesceneshow.com. And we've got some exciting things coming down the pipeline, hopefully. I'm having a meeting tonight to discuss some things, and so hopefully that will go well, and there'll be some good fruit from that. So thank you for listening, and have a blessed week.